So welcome to tonight's program, Accidental Travel Writer, 3 Journeys in Central Asia, presented by David Mould with Storrs Library. My name is Lindsay. I'm a library assistant here at Storrs Library. In tonight's program, David will share 3 journeys in Central Asia from Kazakhstan's surreal modern capital. David travels to the mining and steel city of Karaganda, where thousands died in labor camps in the Stalin era. From Kyrgyzstan's less pretentious capital, Bishkek, he takes a trip on a wheezing bus to Karakol and on the shore of Issyk Kul, the second largest alpine lake in the world, and a rest stop for Russian explorers and Chinese traders. And it's a wild ride over 3 mountain ranges in Lada from Bishkek to the ancient Silk Road city of Osh in southern Kyrgyzstan, a flashpoint for ethnic tensions in the post-Soviet era. So our presenter this evening is David Mould, PhD, Professor Emeritus of Media Arts and Studies at Higher University. David, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Okay, Lindsay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So let me share screen here and get started. Well, welcome everybody. Wow, this is my 3rd or 4th presentation for the Storrs Library, and I think I've explained the Accidental Travel Writer title once before. I mean, basically the point here is that, I haven't been lucky enough to have anybody pay me to go to places and write about them, but I've traveled a lot and I've written as I've gone. So we're going to be in Central Asia tonight, as we were for the last presentation that I did, Lost in Stanland. And this is really where I kind of started writing about travels. Over about a 20-year period, I made frequent trips to Central Asia. I had 2 Fulbright fellowships, one in Kyrgyzstan, one in Kazakhstan. I worked for various international organizations. My wife and I lived in Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, for just over a year. I lived for 6 months in the place we're going to go to in a moment, the capital of Kazakhstan. So, this, as I say, is an area that really was kind of very important in my life, and I was lucky enough to go there at a time when things were changing a lot. So, let's see. As usual, it doesn't about. Let me just try to stop the share there and start it again here. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to start in a place here that on this map is called Astana. I think you can see it here, which is the current capital of Kazakhstan. It was actually recently renamed Nursultan in honor of the long-serving president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev. And I think it's important to think about how this place, which we'll go to visually in a moment, got to be the capital. So let's go back to 1991, and at that time, with the fall of the Soviet Union, the capital of Kazakhstan was down here, this city called Almaty, way in the southeast of the country. Lovely place in the, kind of in the foothills of the Tian Shan Mountains. But, when Kazakhstan became independent, trying to govern this whole big country, it's got the 9th largest land area in the world, from this city in the southeast, was going to be problematic. A lot of the northern area here was mostly Russian, and there was always a danger that there would be some rebellion here, that the Russians would want to not be in Kazakhstan, dominated by ethnic Kazakhs, but to join on to Russia, the Russian Federation. This is Siberia up here. And there were some other issues as well. Which led to sort of the relocation of the capital. There was, Emmanuel Adugu, wow, finding some familiar names popping in here. There were mineral resources in the north, coal, iron and oil, and also most of the major industrial plants. Also, a more dangerous Soviet legacy, there was a stockpile of around 1,000 nuclear warheads. And the area in the north was also what was called the Polygon, which was the area where, for about 40 years, the Soviets conducted above and below ground nuclear tests. So you have this new country and really no sense of national identity yet. The thing that the president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, wants to do is he wants to unite the country, and the major thing that he did to try to do this is to move the capital from this rather lovely city Almaty in the southeast to the rather remote area of the northern steppe here, a place called Astana. I lived in Astana for more than 6 months. I arrived in January. If you think it's cold today, my first day in Astana, it was minus 40 degrees. It's the second coldest capital in the world. And a lot of people didn't want to move, the diplomats included, but Nazarbayev didn't change his mind. And they took an old mining town called Akmola, and they renamed it Astana, which in the Kazakh language means capital. So that gave Kazakhstan the unusual distinction of having it was the only country in the world where the name of the capital actually means capital in the native language. As I say, today it's called Nursultan. So this is Astana. It's this kind of still a rather astonishing place architecturally. Unlike any other city in Central Asia, which has its drab Soviet architecture, although its population is about half of that of the former capital Almaty, which has about it's a population a bit over 1 million now, it looks and feels a lot larger, which is exactly what the President Nazarbayev wanted it to be. This was my home base when I was on a Fulbright fellowship in 2011. I actually didn't live amongst all of this stuff. I lived kind of across the river in the old Soviet city. But this place where I visited fairly frequently, and and visited offices and toured around, and did some lecturing. Wide boulevards and parks and all of this futuristic architecture, it kind of looked like a whole collection of structures that kind of been dropped by aliens from space. Or the other comparison I've made, if you know the movie, is like the Capitol in the Hunger Games. And Kazakhstan spends very lavishly on international sporting events. I was there during the Asian Winter Games, regularly buys supplements in Western newspapers to advertise itself. But it's a very, Kazakhs are incredibly proud of their capital city. To other people, it seems just a little weird. In Russian, they talk about Astana as Moy Lubimy Gorod, my favorite city. To me, it was just a little sterile. And as it was being built, these are some of the comments that came out from Western journalists. So you've got The Economist and The Guardian, the space station and the steppes. It looks a bit more like Dubai, I think, or a very cold Dubai, than anywhere else. And of course, Kazakhstan is very, very sensitive about this. I mean, it wants to project this image as a modern, progressive country here. And of course, they were deeply offended by what Sacha Baron Cohen did in the Borat movie, Cultural Learnings of America for Make Benefit Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan. Well, of course, most people understood that what Cohen was doing was really nothing to do with Kazakhstan at all. He was satirizing political and cultural intolerance. But unfortunately, the government of Kazakhstan and quite a few people there took it very literally and got rather offended by it. So let's do a little tour of Astana, or at least of some of these buildings. And this is Bayterek, the national monument, which is the top destination for domestic tourists. You go to Astana or Nursultan, you've got to go up the elevator to Bayterek. And the form here is something called a samuruk, which in Turkic mythology is the magical bird of happiness who lays the egg in the branches of a poplar tree. So this is meant to represent the poplar tree with the golden egg laid in it. And if you travel all the way up there, there's almost shrine-like quality to the place. At the top, there is a gold there's like the imprint of Nazarbayev's hand, so you can kind of place your hand in his hand, think about the great leader and curse the current politicians who are running the place. This pyramid-like building is the Palace of Peace and Accord, constructed at the cost of about $58 million to host the Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions. And I guess architecturally it's pretty interesting because of the extreme temperatures, very cold winters, very hot summers. The steel frame was designed to withstand expansion and contraction up to 30 centimeters. It's one of the two signature designs by the British architect Sir Norman Foster. And then there is this. This is the mall, if you like. This is the Khan Shatyr, the tent of the Khan. And this is meant to represent the traditional Kazakh rural dwelling, the yurt, and it looks like it's sort of leaning a bit in the wind, which blows a lot across the steppe. But underneath this is this huge shopping mall. It's got squares and cobbled streets. It's got movie theaters, a botanical garden, a boating river, mini golf, roller coasters, a water park, and an indoor beach resort, which I'm sure is pretty popular this time of year. So if Dubai can have its indoor ski slope, then Astana needs its tropical beach. A kind of very interesting, but also a very weird place to live for about a 6-month period. Okay, we're going to take a short trip from Astana here, and I keep calling it Astana because that's what I always call it, and I should be calling it Nursultan. And we're going to go to this place, Timiatau, which is a steel town, and then briefly to Karaganda, or this is the Kazakh spelling of it, Karagandi, about a 3-hour train journey. So look at Kazakhstan. As I said, in land area, it's the 9th largest country in the world, more than 1 million square miles. You could put all of Western Europe into it. It would all fit in there. Population, I didn't look at this recently, I should have checked, but less than 20 million. And most of them are in cities scattered across the country. And because of the size of the country, the cheapest and but not the fastest way to travel is by train. And it's really interesting. I talked to people on the train. They said, "Oh, a 2 or 3 day trip by train, that's nothing." So, but if you're going from Almaty here up to Uralsk here, it could be 3 days by train across the steppe. And on this trip here from Astana to Timiatau and Karagandi, You cross the Polygon, okay? The picture on the right is the one on the front of on the cover of my book Postcards from Stanland. And this is an area about the size of New Jersey where, as I said, for more than 40 years, the Soviets conducted above and below ground nuclear tests. Now, people live in this area. You know, there was really no fences keeping them out. And now the government is proposing opening it for mining and commercial agriculture. Not a great idea. So we're going to go to this place, Timiatow now. This is one of my interpreters, Irina Velska, and Irina, you should be wearing a hat. And Timiatow is one of these really interesting Soviet-era industrial cities, kind of established in the 1950s and 1960s. There was an older town here, which is actually quite rather stylish, which existed pre-World War II. But here is the newer town, very, very, very Soviet in architecture. Lots of apartment blocks with some appropriate Soviet realistic art there, monumental public architecture, and this huge steel mill. And that was the foundation of Timiatow, which in the Kazakh language means iron mountain. The iron ore was mined, there were coal deposits near, and so they set up this absolutely huge steel plant. And sort of here it is today. You can see the chimneys there. It's now owned by the Indian company ArcelorMittal, and it's still operating, though at less capacity here. The sign at the bottom is a wonderful Soviet road signs here. Gorod Metallurgy, city of metallurgy. Okay, but it's interesting because Nazarbayev, the now former president, he began his career as a steel worker in the steel mill here, and then he rose through the Communist Party hierarchy. So it's a pretty interesting town in its own way. We're going to move quickly to Karaganda, which is a larger industrial city. This is a city which was kind of founded using essentially slave labor, people who were sent out to this area of the Soviet Union to the labor camps. So you have the gulags of the Siberia, these are the Karlags. In fact, Alexander Solzhenitsyn served his time in a Karlag not far from Karaganda. But I just wanted to show you the most interesting place, in my opinion, in Karaganda. This is the Ecomuseum. Much more impressive than some of those showpiece museums up in Astana. And this guy on the right, Dmitry Kalmykov, he's a Ukrainian. He started this museum because he wanted to document some of the damage to the environment that was happening in this area of Kazakhstan. Remember that we're very close here to the Polygon where the nuclear tests were carried out. And to the southwest is Baikonur, where the Soviets launched, and the Russians still launch, their space missions from. So over the last 20 years or so, Dmitry's been sort of picking up all of this stuff, from dump sites, and also simply stuff that's dropped out of the sky. It's kind of what I call space junk. And it includes stuff that's come down from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which is about 550 miles to the southwest. But the rockets are launched in this direction, and they burn off their first stage somewhere over the region. It's a lightly populated area, so usually they don't cause any damage, although there have been some that have crashed and spilled fuel. So he's picking up all of this stuff. And he has this great photo album. These are photos that he's taken out in remote villages. And what the villagers have done here is they've got these bits of rockets and they've made summer kitchens out of them and garages out of them. You see an old Lada park there, using them as fencing for animals. I would say it's a very intelligent recycling of space junk. Okay, we're going to switch here to Kyrgyzstan, where my wife Stephanie and I lived for more than a year. And we lived in the capital, Bishkek. I had a Fulbright fellowship there. And the rule in Bishkek is, you know, if you want to get oriented, the mountains are always to the south. These are the Alatu Mountains, which we will be going across in a few minutes here. So we're going to take about a 250-mile road trip here from Bishkek, the capital. We're going to go to Tokmok, and then we're going to wind our way through the mountains here to Balakchi, which is on the western end of Issyk Kul, warm lake, the second largest alpine lake in the world after Titicaca in South America. Then we're going to follow the northern shore here, and we're going to get to Karakol, which in Kyrgyz, which is kind of like Kazakh, means black hand, an agricultural region. So this is our bus. Actually, this is not actually our bus, but our bus was very much like this one. And what can I say? We should have chosen a better bus, because this trip, 250 miles, took more than 6 hours. The bus broke down several times. The radiator boiled over. First part of the trip takes you through the mountains here, through the so-called Kunge Alatu here, and it's a pretty interesting area because this is the area where in 1916, before the Bolshevik Revolution, Kyrgyz and Kazakhs fought against the Tsarist government, which was requisitioning cattle and food and conscripting men into World War I. And the Russian troops came in and brutally suppressed the rebellion. It's estimated about 50,000 people fled across these mountains trying to reach China. Many killed, starved, or froze to death. And in the valley of the Chui River, you still see memorials that simply have a date on them. They say 1916. This is when there was this great suppression of the rebellion, and many, many people died. So you climb out of the mountains, and then you come down to the lake where the road divides, and lovely panoramas of the mountains here. The lake, Issyk Kul, which means warm lake, about just over 100 miles wide, more than 100 miles long, about over 40 miles wide, and lots of streams and lakes are flowing into it, but there's no visible outlet. This was on a branch of the Silk Road, going from Europe to China, and so there's evidence, architectural evidence, that Venetian merchants were here, an old Armenian monastery. So it's a really, really interesting part of the country. So in Soviet times, Issyk Kul was famous for its clean water, its healthy climate, and it was a favorite vacation spot for factory workers who stayed in what were called the sanatoria, the health spas, kind of on a Soviet package deal. There were also government resorts and mansions, and they also conducted secret torpedo trials in the lake. Now, after the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, things went downhill pretty rapidly. The Soviet tourists were not coming anymore, and a lot of this property was bought up at sort of fire sale prices by corrupt politicians, and now that things have improved a little bit, they have prime lakeside property. And tourists have been coming back, I guess not during COVID. It's a very fertile region, famous for its apples. Karakol, the city we'll be going to in a moment, in Kyrgyz means black hand, a reference to the earth. All right, so I had to put this one in for my wife. She's a little younger than she is now, so am I there. Mermaids along the lake, right? And so here we are in Karakol, and you can kind of see the Russian influence here. From 1864, it was a Russian military fort, a garrison town, and it kind of has a sort of a feel of a provincial place here, sort of place where they roll up the sidewalks a little early, but there's a Russian Orthodox cathedral, but a really interesting mix. The picture on the right is of a Dungan Chinese Muslim mosque, built without nails in 1910. It's a bit like a Buddhist pagoda. And around the town, these sort of simple 1- and 2-story Russian colonial houses, some of them with gingerbread trim, and lovely streets lined with poplar and birch. And took these pictures near the bazaar, near the market. Just a nice sort of mid-sized country market, fruit and vegetables, the inevitable Chinese clothes imported with the designer labels sewn in, the usual consumer electronics, and an animal market on Sunday morning with sheep, cattle and horses. People were really, really friendly there and made me sit on the horse. I'm just sitting on the horse. I did not ride this horse. Okay, we're going to take our third trip here, and this is going to take us from Bishkek over the mountains. And I mean, I can go to Osh now. I mean, but it's not like that. Whoops, I'm going back here. Let me just back up on here. It's more of a wiggly route. Okay, you cross 3 mountain ranges here to get to Osh in the south of the country. We did this just a few months after we'd arrived. We wanted to make this trip before winter set in and the mountain passes closed. So it's from Bishkek to Osh down here. It's, as the crow flies, it's about 200 miles. By road, it's about 550 miles. We needed 15 hours to make this trip, 15 hours on the road. It was a very long day's drive. So this is kind of what it looks like. They've improved it since we were there, but this is the main north-south artery in the country that carries, all the commercial traffic. But the road in many places was pretty rough at this time. You cross 3 mountain ranges. One of the passes is at 11,000 feet. Now we know, you can hire a tourism company to take you. Even at that time, they were going to charge us $450 for some Toyota Land Cruiser and a professional driver. And we went, nah, we're not going to do that. So went down to the bazaar in Bishkek, where there were a number of drivers who, needed passengers to go south. And, you look for a car that has got Osh plates, and then you bargain. So we found this guy, his name was Jolobev, and this is his little Lada. He was transporting vodka to the south, and so we were kind of, the paying ballast, I suppose, on his trip. And we are at, I guess, what you would call a truck stop here, just before we go up to the first mountain pass. And I mean, we'd started early in the morning, but at 8 o'clock in the morning, some of the truckers were knocking back the vodka. Fortunately, Jolobev only wanted tea. And it's a kind of a treeless landscape here. Lots of rough slopes of loose rock. This is summer pasture for the herders with their sheep and horses and goats. There's really only a few villages and one major town on the road. The major town is called Toktagul, where there's a big hydroelectric plant there. We went through 3 tunnels, and I just took these photos out of the car window here. I need to find a picture here, but at one tunnel, the truck that had jackknifed and was blocking the way. I mean, in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan, you don't call AAA. So basically, everybody got out of their cars, and we pushed this. I guess I helped a bit. We pushed this big semi to the side of the road so the cars would pass. I've got to find that photo somewhere. And so we descend into the valley. After the 3rd mountain range, you descend into the eastern Fergana Valley, and you briefly go across Uzbekistan. I talked a bit about that in my previous presentation here. So you've got to go across the border, have a little argument or at least a little discussion with the border guards, and then you cross back into Kyrgyzstan and you come to Osh, which is actually only 5 miles from the border with Uzbekistan. And I think you can see the top of the picture right is from the top of Suleiman Mountain, this big rock outcrop, which has significance in Islam and dominates the town. Suleiman Mountain is a sacred place for Muslims. Osh was a key trading center on one of the branches of the Silk Road since medieval times. It has a very mixed population of ethnic Kyrgyz and ethnic Muslims with Russians and Ukrainians and others there. But when Kyrgyzstan became independent, there was a lot of competition for resources and also political power, and there were major ethnic unrest, violence in this region, both in 1990, just before independence, and then in 2010, when Kyrgyzstan had the second of its revolutions. And right now, in the south here, the Kyrgyz tend to control politics and the media, and Uzbek language and culture are somewhat repressed, even though the Uzbeks they're probably not a majority in Osh anymore, but they're certainly a majority in the commercial sector. They were the people who controlled the trade on the bazaar. So we wanted to come down partly to go to this event, the Osh Harvest Festival, when harvest festivals happen after the harvest. And so this is the traditional end of season when herding families get together. They pack up their yurts, their traditional tents, and they move from their summer pastures, mountain pastures, to the villages for winter. And the Soviets kind of allowed this to go on. The Soviets kind of liked mainstream sports in big arenas and things like that, but they allowed traditional sports to continue. I think perhaps partly because they considered it a safer outlet for people's energies than religion or Islam. So this was held at a hippodrome outside Osh in a kind of a field of decorated yurts there. And, almost everybody, not us, but most of the people here arrived on horseback, and this guy on the right is wearing the traditional Kyrgyz felt hat, the so-called kolpak there. And a whole range of traditional sports here, a lot of horseback events here, but also falconry. It's a pretty good picture, though, I say so myself. Maybe Stephanie took it. I'll credit her with the good pictures here. And then certainly wrestling matches. Wrestling is pretty big in Central Asia. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan's larger neighbor, has done pretty well in the Olympics on wrestling. And then there were the horse events. Okay, lots of horseback games. Even wrestling on horseback. They don't just wrestle on the ground, they wrestle on horseback. And this is a game called Kizkumai, which involves male and female riders. You have a large crowd in the stands there. And male and female riders chase each other. And if the man catches the woman, she has to kiss him. If she catches him, she horsewhips him. I'm going to make no further comment on that particular subject. Okay? And this is a game called Ulak Tartyshy. Versions of this game are played, all over from southern Siberia to Afghanistan, really anywhere there are herders who want to practice their horseback skills. And so in this game, Ulak Tartyshy, two teams compete for possession of an animal carcass, and then they kind of race for a touchdown at some point. It was a little difficult to understand the rules. And while they're doing that, they're allowed to wrestle each other, whip and kick each other, really. And so mostly it was like this tight scrum of riders there. Now, usually the thing that they are, the prize that they have to get to the touchdown is a legless sheep or goat. But these were the professionals. This was a professional circuit here. So it was a 250-pound calf that they were battling over. Whew, yeah, okay. Well, I don't remember who won. And then lots of good food. These are Uzbeks here, and they've got the flatbread, the lipyoshki, and then the wonderful lamb kebab, the shashlik. And they also had a plov, a pilaf cook-off, cooked over wildfire. So a very, very memorable occasion, well worth that 15-hour drive. So these stories and more are in Postcards from Stanland, Journeys in Central Asia by yours truly, available at all good bookstores and Amazon and whatever, or send me an email and I'll sign one and send it to you. So that's the end of the presentation. I'd be really, really happy here to take comments, questions, complaints, or whatever. So I guess the floor for the next 15 minutes or so is open. Thank you so much for your attention. And I guess Lindsay should come back and moderate it if people need moderating.
There is one comment in the chat. It says, nice pictures, Dr. Mould. You must be a good photographer.
I'm trying to remember now. Both Stephanie, my wife, and I took photographs, and at this point it's difficult to remember who took which photograph. These, of course, were all in the pre-digital era, so we were taking stills, and we were also we took slides, transparencies as well, and I think it's mostly the slides that I had digitized. I think it's always the slides I had digitized and have reproduced pretty well. So thank you. I don't, I occasionally get a good photograph, but yeah. How is this region doing now politically and economically? Thank you, Nancy. That's a big question. I think it's a mixed picture here. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, both very mountainous countries, are, poor. They've always been quite poor. There's not a lot of good agricultural land, not a lot of industry there. In fact, the major source of income in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan would be remittances from workers who are working mostly in Russia, I would say, and sending money home. And that's a sort of a familiar kind of economic pattern, I think, to a lot of people. Uzbekistan is a much more fertile country. I mean, the Fergana Valley, which we briefly went through on our trip from Bishkek to Osh, is a very fertile area, fruits and vegetables. It's never quite shaken off its Soviet background, and so, state control and regulation and corruption have really kind of stifled economic development in Uzbekistan. But I mean, potentially, it can grow. Historically, it was a region where cotton was raised, and that, of course, uses up a lot of water, and so water is a big issue in that area. Kyrgyzstan has water in its mountains, which it releases periodically to Uzbekistan. But this is kind of why the Aral Sea is drying up, because the water's coming out of the mountains. I'm sorry, I'm giving you more of a geography and economy lecture than you needed here, Nancy. That's why the Aral Sea is drying up, because a lot of the water is used for irrigation. Kazakhstan is a kind of, I can't really speak to Turkmenistan because I haven't been there. It's kind of a rather weird country with a lot of state control, I think a lot of poverty as well. Kazakhstan's much more interesting, I think. Kazakhstan's been really if there's been a success story in the region, it's been Kazakhstan. Now, partly that's dependent on natural resources. Kazakhstan has oil in the Caspian Sea, and that's being exported. It also has natural gas exports. And so there are oil and gas pipelines going west and east towards China. Agriculturally, mostly, there's not a lot of cultivated land there. Most of it is, grazing land, steppe. Kazakhstan, though, I think has, really opened up its markets, encouraged Western investment and things like that. So economically, it's done better, although it is, I think, still very much a resource-dependent economy, particularly on oil and gas. Politically, again, it's a bit of a mixed picture. Turkmenistan is an absolutely autocratic state run by, and I forget the name of the president right now, but there's no democracy there. Kyrgyzstan is the most open in terms of politics, and it has been since the 1990s. No elections are free, but elections were relatively open there. But Kyrgyzstan has had a series of revolutions where people have gone out into the streets and overthrown the government. So it's had democracy, but politically it's been unstable. Kazakhstan has had, one president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who retired a couple of years ago, has been very, very stable politically, but at a price, in that there's been clampdowns on media, clampdowns on the opposition as well. But it's a kind of an interesting balance when you talk to people. And the contrast between Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, which are the two countries I know well. I've been to Tajikistan a few times and Uzbekistan, but I really be most comfortable talking about Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. It's an interesting contrast because you talk to people and they say, okay, yeah, I understand everything that you're saying about democracy and a free press, but we're doing okay in Kazakhstan. Our incomes have risen, we have a nice apartment, our children go to school, the medical care is there. If the government wants to lock up the opposition, that's okay by us as long as our living standards begin to improve. And so it's a sort of there was this kind of notion after the Soviet Union fell that if you went in and you established a free market there, then democracy and freedom of the press would follow. Well, what happened in Kyrgyzstan was, there was a relative degree of democracy and a relative free press, and the economy went into the toilet. In Kazakhstan, the economy developed, a free market developed, but there was not the level of political or press freedom. I'm sorry, a very long answer to your question, Nancy, but you did ask. Okay, do we have a... let's see.
I've shared the link to your website, David.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm also going to put it in the chat, or just put it in there, to register for the next program in the Travel Writer Series, Unaccessible India. So
all right, okay, good, okay. Be very happy to, entertain any other questions or comments. Anybody ever think of traveling there? I think it's kind of ready for tourists now. It wasn't for a while, but and I don't think I don't think you have to be as adventurous as you used to go to Central Asia. Yeah, I don't know. What have I done? I've made everybody silent here. Oh dear, oh dear. Let's see.
Hey, David. That was really a great presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and it is being recorded, so you will receive the recording in an email when it's finished. Oh, we have one more question here. Are women treated equally there?
Well, Nancy has a way of asking big, important questions. Thank you, Nancy. I would say that these are all patriarchal societies. But it's kind of an interesting thing here. I mean, historically, patriarchal societies, agriculture societies where the men were basically in control. But interesting enough, I think the Soviet Union had a positive impact here because in the Soviet system, women maybe they didn't advance to the highest levels, but for example, in higher education, in medicine, and in a lot of other fields, women were able to, pursue successful professional lives. And so, I think there's still the tradition here that, families would prefer to have sons rather than daughters. I think particularly in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan that, and especially in urban areas, I think there's a difference between urban and rural areas there, that women were, women, I think, had equality. I can't say equality. Did they have professional opportunities? Yes, they did. And so, for example, I was working in the higher education sector here, and most of the deans that I work for were women. Now, the rectors, who would be the equivalent of the university presidents, I think were universally men, but it's a little different there because they were all political appointees, who may not know anything about higher education at all. They were appointed by the president, as they were, supporters and members of his party. So I think if you're comparing Central Asia with some other Asian countries, I think you will actually find that, except in rural areas, especially in urban areas, women are in a better situation than in some other countries there. I mean, I really don't want to generalize here, but as I say, I didn't sort of get a sense when I was living there and working there that women did not feel equal. I'm sure, there were conversations that were had that I was not privy to because I'm a man. But I just think that the Soviet influence over 70 years, under which women did have more rights, were has had a big impact on this region. Any impact from the Belt and Road Initiative? Okay, this is China's attempt to, shall we say, extend its economy and infrastructure west to the Indian Ocean and that. I would say yes. And I'll just quote you a line that actually I use in one of my stories. It's from Kazakhstan, and the line, it's a bit of a joke, is, if you want to leave Kazakhstan, learn English. If you want to stay, learn Chinese. Okay, people in Kazakhstan are still quite worried that China expanding is just going to come over the border there to this vast country and start populating it there. But there's been increasing Chinese investment, especially in the energy sector in Kazakhstan. Not so much I don't think there's much in Kyrgyzstan and much in Uzbekistan, because strategically or economically there's not much for them. I mean, there's not much for China to gain there. Geographically, it's better for China to build rail lines that go down to Bangladesh or Myanmar to connect with the Indian Ocean. So, but China looks at these kind of cross-Eurasian routes going from Western China, from Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, maybe one of the reasons they've clamped down the Uyghurs, across Kazakhstan to Russia and to Europe. So those gas and pipelines, I think, are important, and China is certainly investing in roads and railways. But I think kind of in this kind of east-west direction, there's nothing for China particularly to gain by going into Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan. I mean, they will try to build allies there with some investment and loans and things like that. But I think from China's perspective, Kazakhstan's really the only target in the region, and it's looking more towards South Asia for the rest, and Southeast Asia for the rest of its investments. So, good question. Hadn't thought too much about it, but you made me think about it. Well, Lindsay, if we're okay, how else was anybody else in the chat here? I think okay. So I think we can probably wrap it here. Let me thank everybody here, and next presentation in January, whatever the date is, I'll be talking about India, just the wonderful, fascinating, diverse, frustrating, exciting country that is India.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. The next
so much.
session will be Tuesday, January 4th, and I put the link in the chat for you.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thanks to the Stores Library.
Thank you.